In today's episode of Today in World War II, February 1st, the Soviets fire 300,000 shells at Finnish troops. Indian troops capture a couple of key cities in East Africa. The odious Quisling forms his collaborator fascist government in Norway. The U.S. begins its airstrike prep for the invasion of the Gilbert Islands. The Japanese finally begin to evacuate their scarecrow, half-starved soldiers out of Guadalcanal. The first field marshal in German history, I should say, surrenders. The Marines land on Kwajalein Atoll, and finally, a British fighter ace successfully escapes from German captivity. Let's get started. Okay, so on February 1st, 1940, the Soviets have finally gotten smart in the Winter War against Finland, unfortunately for Finland, and they have determined that they need to concentrate all of their firepower on one section of the Mannerheim line, and they decided that they were going to go after Suma, which is near Taipale, which is on the section of the Mannerheim line on the Karelian Peninsula that's closest to Lake Ladoga. They fired 300,000 shells at that sector alone, and this was the start of a Soviet offensive that was not going to stop until the armistice was signed. But I will tell you this. I think I talked about this in yesterday's video the day before. They had already started reaching out to the Swedes through the Swedes to Finland to give them a window of opportunity, I suppose it is, to negotiate. And so what this means was they decided the cost was too much. It's one thing to roll over a country pretty quickly, like they did in the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Pretty bloodless. I thought that was going to happen with the Finns, but by now they were seeing that they were just taking too many casualties. And as someone who spent most of his adult life in the Soviet Union and Russia, I can tell you that they understand one thing only, strength, and you cannot show weakness to them. It just encourages them to go farther. And we see this in the Winter War. Why do you think that I'm talking so much about the Winter War? Because it has parallels to what's happening in today's society. Now, there are also parallels to what's happening any day of the week. And that the parallel is that if you watch a YouTube channel and you like it, you need to subscribe. And that's what I'm asking for you right now, is if you can hit that subscribe button, click the bell that will notify you whenever I drop a new video. And that way you're like, oh, okay, yeah, Don's got another video here. So let me make sure I watch it at my convenience. That's the way the systems work. You don't want to buck the system, okay? I don't make the rules, all right? I just follow them. All right, on on February 1st, 1941, Indian troops captured two key cities in East Africa as part of the what I call the unknown African theater, East Africa, that no one seems to talk about very much, but it was also very, very important. In this case, they captured the cities of Metemma and Agordat. Remember, the Italians uh, controlled with most of East Africa from Kenya on up. I mean, what we're looking at now, modern day Somalia, Eritrea. And remember, they had gone in and invaded Ethiopia and took over Ethiopia. The Horn of Africa was very much an Italian sphere of influence. And when the war started, Mussolini thought that he could walk into Albania and Greece, which he found out he couldn't. He tried to literally have his troops walk into Egypt to take the Suez Canal. That didn't work out very well. And of course, the same thing happened in Italy. So, unfortunately, the Brits had to expend resources, time, money, soldiers, so on and so forth, to defeat them because as weak as they were, as inept as they were at fighting, they were still armed and they still needed to be taken care of. So this was part of the operation. The Brits decided, we're going to get these guys out of here. And that's what this was. And there's an operation that should take place every day on your part because you're watching my videos, you like my channel. I'm assuming you probably subscribe to my channel. Good job. So the next thing to do is to make sure that every time you watch my video, you need to click the thumbs up and then leave a comment because I want the algorithm on my side, not on somebody else's side. Okay, so help me out. I'm not asking for a dime. Okay, I could be begging you for money. I'm not going to do that. I could be selling you some stupid product. Not doing that either. So just please like and subscribe. Excuse me, like and comment. That would be awesome. Okay, so on February 1st, 1942, the U.S. Launched its first airstrikes against the Gilbert Islands. And the Gilbert Islands, what are they? Tarawa. Okay, I'm sure that if you know anything about the Pacific Campaign, when you hear the word Tarawa, you wince. It's like, oh, yeah, that was a tough 2 or 3 days for the Marines, and not so much the Army, because the Army didn't land on Tarawa. They landed on on a different atoll that didn't really have much in the way of fighting. But boy, the Marines got their fair share. But I digress. So what they're doing is they got those. They're just now putting together these carrier task force. It's interesting that the USS Yorktown was involved in this. Now let's look at the time frame here. It's February 1st, 1942. Um, and you know, it's the Yorktown and the Enterprise are still there. This is the old guard. This is not, the Yorktown um, hasn't been sunk yet. Enterprise is still and Yorktown are still part of the carriers that exist. You have the Hornet as well, the Saratoga, and so these are the old school. Uh, you know, Actually, I think the Lexington was still there as well. So right now, what they're doing is they are this we got another year to go. Let's put it this way before the Marines land. I apologize for that, but what they're doing now is they're showing the Japanese after Pearl Harbor that the carriers are a force to be reckoned with, and that the Japanese have to go after them. They have to destroy the carriers to destroy the U.S. Navy, and so they're reminding the Japanese, "Hello, we're here, and we're going to make your outposts' lives a living hell." By doing this. They attacked the Gilbert Islands, they attacked the Marshall Islands, they sent a task force down and attacked Rabaul and attacked the Japanese forces in the South Pacific. It was all designed, number one, to give training and experience for the air crews and the task force, and secondly, like I said, to strike a blow while they could. They weren't going to sit back passively and wait for the Japanese to come to them. So that's what happened there. And then on February 1st, 1942, a very ominous date for the Brits, the Japanese troops had reached Singapore. And they didn't invade it yet, but this is where they're all the northern Malay and Malaya invasion. They landed north of Singapore, and they had worked their way through the jungle, destroying the British and the Commonwealth soldiers, forced them to retreat. Now they reached the island itself of Singapore, the supposedly impenetrable island of Singapore. Well, the next few weeks, we're going to find out exactly how impenetrable Singapore was or wasn't. And I think we're going to put the emphasis on the wasn't part of it, okay? Speaking of joking around about so-called impenetrability, on February 1st, 1943, the Japanese troops began to be evacuated from Guadalcanal by destroyers. Destroyers were the only way the Japanese could get arms and supplies and troops into Guadalcanal for quite a while because the U.S. Navy now was dominating the waters and the Air Force and the Marines and the Navy around Guadalcanal. But this time, the Japanese had been ordered by the emperor to get the troops out of there, and so the Americans still didn't have a clue. They still thought that they were trying to reinforce and continue the fight in Guadalcanal. But tonight was the first night that the Japanese were actually starting to be evacuated from Guadalcanal, and I tell you, you talk about a triple punch of failure. But when it went bad for the Japanese, it went bad quick, right? So they had spent 6 months taking advantage of Allied unpreparedness, lack of resources, and they got used to not having to be involved in a bar fight. Well, they thought they were going to easily take Port Moresby in New Guinea, where the Australians were stationed. Coral Sea, the U.S. Navy, when it wasn't a defeat for either side, it stopped them strategically. It stopped the invasion. It was the first time they'd ever had one of their invasions stopped in a serious way. The Midway Island, they lost four of their six carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor, and then now, after we landed our Marines on Tulagi, Gavutu, and Guadalcanal, and they had spent 6 months, just being their head against the wall, and the era of invincibility was over for the Japanese now. The allies, the Australians, the Americans, we knew that we could beat them, and we had beat them. And so now it was just a long slog pushing them back until 1945. Speaking of long slogs, on February 1st, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus von Paulus, he's Field Marshal of the Sixth Army in Stalingrad. He, on this day, was trapped in the ruins of a department store in Stalingrad. And he wasn't lonely. He also had 14 generals with him, so that was good. Anyway, he surrendered his pocket. Remember, there was two pockets in Stalingrad at this time. The Soviets had driven a wedge between the German forces, and so there was a north and a southern pocket. Well, von Paulus was in the southern pocket, and became the first. He became the first German field marshal in history surrendering. That was a great day. It was a great day because it was, even though we pretty much already knew the war was over, it was just a matter of time. Um, just put the rubber stamp on it when the Sixth Army surrendered in Stalingrad. It was a great victory for the Allies. On February 1st, 1944, the Allies, the Americans, invaded the Marshall Islands in Central Pacific. They did this by a bombardment. The invasion of the Marshall Islands was interesting because it was the only example in the entire Pacific campaign where the uh, the bombardment actually worked. I think it had to do more with the fact that it was not, there weren't caves the Japanese could hide in. It was, these were atolls. They were, uh, it was much easier for the Navy to be able to destroy their strong positions. So when the Marines landed, which they did on this date, it was very easy to it was very easy for them to take the atolls, and so their casualty rates in the Marshall Islands are probably the lowest of any of their campaigns they were in the entire war. And then finally, on February 1st, 1945, the my favorite British fighter ace, RAF fighter ace, Robert Roland Stanford Tuck, was, if you remember, last time we spoke about this at the end of January, not on 41, he had gotten the DSO, and then exactly the same day, a year later, he was shot down by anti-aircraft missions while he was on a rhubarb mission in northern France. He was taken into captivity, and he's got an interesting story there. I didn't really talk about it. I'll talk about it a little bit later in the series. But he and a Polish RAF officer, they escaped from the Germans, and they were able to make their way through Russian lines and got to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And then they sent him home. But wow, what a story! Again, if you're interested in learning more about his life, look up "Fly for Your Life" by Larry Forrester. It's a great biography. I think it's the only biography of Mr. Tuck, but it's definitely worth it. Just like it was worth it for you to watch this video. So I thank you for watching it, and I will see you tomorrow.